Walhauser was only 21 when he hired a man to break into her home and strangle her with a pair of pantyhose. It was a cold-blooded murder. But a careless investigation overlooked footprints leading into her home, a mistake that would leave Walhauser free to kill again, because the death was ruled a suicide, an autoerotic death. Detective Johnny Bonds would investigate the case years later, a case that would become an obsession.
So here is a murder that was committed and passed off as a suicide.
It was passed off as a suicide. It was ruled a suicide, and nobody ever suspected anything else.
Thus began a life of crime. There was nothing in Walhauser's past to explain his future. He grew up in an affluent Houston neighborhood with well-to-do parents. In high school, he already had a fascination for money. A former classmate was Dr. Robert Smith, now a dentist, and once mayor of Garland, Texas.
We'd be playing ball, he'd be saying he's going to go check out some stocks or...
Stocks?
Oh, right.
Back then?
Yes, that was Walt Walhauser. The people that knew Walt fairly well would have voted him very well up to the top of most likely to succeed.
Indeed, his legitimate career seemed assured. He was even featured on the cover of the Houston Business Journal for his plans to open a stock exchange in Houston. But Walhauser also had a dark side. The rich kid from the suburbs liked to brag he was a tough street kid from the hood, as he later told a girlfriend he was pursuing.
I went back to my own neighborhood, and nobody bothered me, of course, because they remember the old days.
Yeah.
Somebody bothered me in the old days, Priscilla. I bothered them back real bad.
Like hell.
Like, well, you know, I didn't kill them, but I ruined their whole day.
Detective Bond says Walhauser liked to live out his tough guy fantasy.
He tried to pass himself off as an associate of the mafia. Had some people believing he was a mafia attorney.
A mobster, a gangster.
Right.
Why would he do that?
I guess like some people have hobbies, that was his hobby.
Authorities soon discovered he had another sinister hobby, arranging murders for money.
Guilty or not guilty?
Houston Judge Ted Poe was a young prosecutor when he got to know Walhauser better than he wanted to.
He found the plotting and killing of people much more intriguing than making money legitimately. It was more fun. It was a game. It was an art form in his mind.
From death row, the triggerman, Alan Janeka, later described what happened on the night of July 5th, 1979. He says he went to the house with Walhauser, whom he refers to as his co-defendant.
And then my co-defendant reached in his coat pocket and brought out a can of mace and sprayed Mr. Weinstraff in the face. And then that's when I got up and walked up behind him and shot him back in the head. From there, my co-defendant sprayed Mrs. Weinstraff in the face with the mace and grabbed a hold of her and threw her down, which then at that time I walked over and put the gun to the side of her head and shot her.
Then the hired killer says Walhauser ordered him to go into the baby's room and shoot young Kevin and eliminate the last heir to the estate.
And looking at the little fella in the crib, I raised the weapon and pulled the trigger.
Kevin was asleep in his baby bed, blue terry cloth pajamas, curled up to his favorite teddy bear, and he was shot in the back of the head.
For money.
For money, for the love of money.
This time, Walhauser and his friend became the main suspects. But then there was another incredible blunder. After a 7-month investigation by the medical examiner's office, where a psychiatric expert examined the history of the victims, these killings were ruled a double murder by Mrs. Weinstraff and a suicide, a finding which infuriated police and family friends.
It made no sense. It made absolutely no sense.
Ellen Davidson, a friend of the family, was one of many incredulous people who protested the suicide ruling.
When Diana died, the medical examiner did the most outrageous thing, the most unrealistic, the most unbelievable thing in ruling that Diana had shot her husband and baby and then committed suicide without a weapon in the house.
Did they feel they'd gotten by with murder?
Oh, yeah. None of these were intended to look like anything except what they were, murder.
They had planned to kill me for the insurance money.
This man, who asked not to be identified, went into business to develop a lakefront property with Walhauser and his partner. As part of the deal, he took out a $1 million life insurance policy, naming them as beneficiaries. He says they planned to kill him and make it look like an accident.
I was thinking that they were friends all along, but I was nothing more than a dollar sign in their eyes.
But the killing never happened because police finally got a break, which helped them reopen and solve the earlier murders. The triggerman was arrested, confessed, and led them to Walhauser. But just when he seemed cornered, Walhauser wiggled out of it again. He struck a plea bargain. He would help the state send his pals to death row in return for a prison term of 30 years.
We expected him to serve most of that 30 years, and none of that happened. He served 9 years on 3 30-year sentences.
This murder indictment naming Walhauser was flawed. It failed to state that a deadly weapon had been used in the commission of the crime. Thus, he became eligible for early parole. And because he had been a model inmate, he was released.
Of course he would be a model inmate. He could run the penitentiary. He could run the penitentiary and make a profit for the state of Texas. He was that smart.
After his release, he cleverly took a whole new identity. He went before a judge and changed his name. It was all legal. Then he began a whole new life of scheming, deception, and profiteering. He slipped away to Arizona, where he mingled with the co-eds and law students at Arizona State University Law School.
Apparently, it was a kind of a game to him.
Kyle Israel was Walhauser's law school classmate. He took these home movies of his pal during graduation.
Best memory from law school was having the foresight to hire a good attorney.
But he didn't fool everyone. He completed law school and was ready to take the bar exam before his earlier identity as Walter Walhauser was discovered, and he was booted out without his degree.
Here he was able to fool the top 3 or 4% of some of the people that you might meet on the streets, and to him that was probably rewarding enough.
Soon he was on the prowl again. Destination Dallas, home of big deals and fast money. Now he was Michael Davis, insurance man, mingling with the movers, shakers, and deal makers downtown. And before long, officials say, he hatched a scheme to resell bogus insurance policies.
I never did see any money, never did see the policy.
Lily Faust, a 91-year-old Texas widow who lives alone with her pets, bought an insurance policy from a representative of Walhauser's company last year. She'd later find it was worthless.
And I paid him $20,000.
$20,000?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a substantial amount of money.
You darn right. I could use it.
Lily was more fortunate than some. Dozens invested millions of dollars. Now officials say it's all gone, and Walhauser made off with nearly $2 million of their dollars.
And how do you feel?
I think it's dirt.
So how could a dangerous killer out on parole move around and fool people so easily? For him, it was no trouble because the state's overburdened parole system was so easy to con. He was only required once a year to send this postcard form to his parole officers. They only knew what he told them. He was an unemployed student, and no one bothered to check.
And the parole board blew it. They absolutely blew it.
Ellen Davidson, the friend of the family that Walhauser arranged to have murdered, was one of many people who tried to get parole officials to keep him on a tight leash.
The parole board did just a horrible job. They did not watch him closely enough.
Had they known, they would have found life was good for Walhauser. He bought a house in the suburbs, authorities say with cash, got married, had neighbors and friends and birthday parties. He seemed like a model husband and businessman. But his fortunes changed when state insurance detectives say they broke his scam.
This is the News 8 Update.
Good evening. A convicted murderer who time and time again has beaten the legal justice system nearly slips through a crack again.
In June, Walhauser was indicted along with 31 others in the insurance case. The police went to his home to arrest him and used a battering ram to break down the front door. But Walhauser was gone, thus leaving behind his wife, his home, and his business.
This guy basically outsmarted the state of Texas on every turn.
He may have, but Tom, I think you're being quite unfair.
Glenn Castleberry speaks for the Texas Parole Division that's taking a lot of heat about the Walhauser case. He says his agency just can't keep up.
We don't have the kind of law enforcement investigative resources to go tracking 24 hours a day every one of the 100,000 people we have on parole.
There was a reported sighting of Walhauser in London. The international cops, Interpol, and the FBI were conducting a worldwide manhunt. Just when authorities were losing hope of finding Walhauser, he fooled them once again. When here in Dallas, he simply walked into the police department and surrendered. Why? Well, sources close to the case say he was expecting to cut a new deal for leniency. But there was no deal. This time, Walhauser apparently made the mistake. And after 25 years of blunders by Texas authorities, they vow there won't be any this time.